kind of gradual understanding of plutocracy's takeover of democratic government, how it's damaged our culture and our spirit, how wealth inequality lies at the foundation of so many of America's troubles. Under the leadership of Elaine Sullivan, we've had teams moving out around the state. We've been from Taos to Las Cruces. We've covered a lot of ground. With the help of Walter Dilts and Anthony Carlson, we've created videos of our presentations, and twice presented a dramatic presentation of Voices for History, of people, men and women who stood up with dignity and for nonviolence, for respect and a chance. We presented town halls and song and music. And we've been part of the progressive wind that's been blowing across the country. We're a part of it. We're not the only part of it, but we are a part of it. We've joined with the rest of New Mexico in keeping us on the move toward the long term. We've got three particularly strong efforts going this fall, just to tell you about. One of them is the Alliance for Democracy, for Real Democracy. We met again started in July with our conference in July, and met again last week, and the consensus in that group of representation from Move On and from Common Cause and from Labor and from Taos and from Cruces and from Wagon Mountain, people from Albuquerque and around, consensus was that the place where we could begin with our multiple agendas, all of these agendas suffer from the oppressions of plutocracy at the top. The suppression of democracy. No matter what cause you've been working on, what cause the people who were there last week who've been working on, they all ultimately come down to the problems of the narrowing of possibility, the narrowing of opportunity that comes from the plutocracy's takeover of our government. All of that's what's been happening. And we got together in order to recognize that we have this common problem, and also recognize we have all these individual things that we've been doing, and we want to continue to do. But one of the ways in which we might begin to work on it most successfully would be not to start the Congress, not even start the state legislature, but start locally. So we are going to band together with the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, which has been doing democracy schools all over the country. We're going to band together with them and do democracy schools here in order to create a forum, a local forum, a city forum, a county forum, where we might begin to push forward on the initiatives that the profit motive, the Wall Street motive, simply does not recognize. So you'll be hearing more about that. The Alliance was very enthusiastic to get forward going on that, and that will be moving forward in January. We've also been in touch with Stanford University and PBS to create a democratic polling effort, which is a huge effort to draw people by a lot from around the state. Not by a lot, but in an objective poll, so we get a cross-section of all the people in Mexico, bring them together and have a conversation about education in Mexico, and the ways in which democracy absolutely depends, and economic prosperity absolutely depends on well-educated people. So we're going to do that not with people who are advocates like most of us here tonight, but people who have been selected randomly as a cross-section of the New Mexico population. So we'll have young people, old people, poor people, rich people, doctors, and people. Unlike the cross-section of the legislature, we'll have a real cross-section of the Mexican people. We'll bring them together and we'll talk about it. And because they are a cross-section, they have an authenticity in their conclusions as they come out, and the changes in their conclusions as they come out from the beginning when they went in, when we pull them again when they go out, will have some impact, and then we will follow that up. So we are working at democracy at the education level. And thirdly, and with great excitement, we are launching a new banking initiative. There is an invisible empire out in the world, and its expanses everywhere. Thomas Jefferson said that the banks would be among the greatest dangers that would ever face the Republic, and he was right. Global banking is everywhere. It is endemic, pandemic, and its moral failure is epidemic. The global banks are on the corner of Cerrillos and Paseo and at Trafalgar Square in London. They are here on Rodeo Road and across the ocean in the Champs-Élysées in Paris. They are scattered on street corners all across the state of New Mexico, and from Berlin to Moscow to Delhi to Shanghai. And in many cases, the same name is over the door in all those places. Lose a credit card in London and make a call to Boston to get it back. Run out of money in South America and get cash at the Bank of America. The empire is unobtrusive, it needs no army, and it's quietly at your What is not so well understood is that we are also quietly as much in their service as were peasants, artisans, shopkeepers in the Middle Ages, 700 years ago. This is, therefore, a whole new, largely invisible, but very real financial empire, and one for which almost no political theory or popular understanding exists. It is toward that understanding that we've moved now by taking the bank on the banking initiative. With your help, we're beginning to uncover a vast network of local and global powers. Probably be safe to speculate that 80% of the world's banking is now controlled by fewer than 20 mega banks, maybe less than that. From 1990 to 2012, banks in America shrank from some number of, in the 50s, the big banks, the major banks, down to 6 mega banks. Bank of America, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, Citibank, and Goldman Sachs, and that's it. So from the kinds of banks that you and I grew up with on the street corner when we were walking down the hill from school, to this now major takeover of the banking industry, we have 6 in charge. Goldman Sachs provided Bob Rubin to become Bill Clinton's Secretary of Treasury, and Henry Paulson for George W. Bush. Larry Summers was a paid consultant for Goldman Sachs. Goldman employees contributed over $900,000 to the first Obama campaign. In 2006, before the crash, Goldman and its employees contributed more than $500,000 to the Democratic candidacy of Chuck Schumer in New York for the United States Senate, and he's a member of the Senate Financing Committee. $500,000 for one senator from Goldman Sachs. Ask yourself, if you were running for office and some company offered you $900,000, would you let that company's executives influence your thought? Yes, Katie. Yes. Yes, Lindsay. Yes, Robin. They do influence their thought. And the empire is financial, but it's beyond financial. Goldman can be a metaphor for the other 6 giants. It's not just a bank. It has major holdings in aerospace, casinos, restaurants, oil refineries, insurance and finance, energy, meat processing, hotels, healthcare, media, on and on. We're not just talking about a bank. We think of it as a bank. We've got a bank with substantial holdings in the industries around the country that were supported by our bailouts. And this empire is strengthened by interlocking directorates, agency controls, and mutual assistance. Listen to this. The current head of Greece's debt management agency began his career at Goldman Sachs. Italy's new prime minister and finance minister combined is an international advisor to Goldman Sachs. So there's another former board member of the Deutsche Bank, Bundesbank, and the executive board of the European Bank, and he's an advisor to Goldman Sachs. The new head of the European Union Central Bank is the former managing director of Goldman Sachs International. The former head of the IMF's European Department is a former vice chairman of Goldman Sachs International. The former Attorney General of Ireland is a director of Goldman Sachs International. We now begin to see an interlocking private, government, industrial, and financial complex that spans the country and the world. But we have not yet given enough evidence, I've not yet given enough evidence to call this an empire. To be an empire, we have to be in control. So let's look at control. Here's how it gets it. It will drive away the public focus. It does drive and will drive and will continue to drive away the public focus from equity issues toward debt. The great debate that is raging and should be raging in this country and around the world tonight is about jobs and education, healthcare, and climate change. The managers of the campaigns and directors of the banks have, however, directed and steered the conversation away from these issues. Instead, the issue has become the issue of debt. Why? Who wants it to be about debt? Who wants to say it's debt, called debt a fiscal cliff? The answer is the great banks. Why? Because they hold the debt. Who is making sure that governments pay off the debts? The global banks. Who is squeezing out austerity in Greece and Italy and Spain? The global banks. The squeeze is coming from both private banks and central banks. Who controls the central banks? The private banks. Think of austerity versus stimulus, and why stimulus is not seriously on the table even in the US today. Why not? Stimulus increases the money supply, but a limited money supply gives the banks more power. Limited funds or austerity makes those who already have money more powerful against those who are starting up. Limited funds increases the wealth of the old compared to the young, and the wealth of the established businesses compared to the new businesses. Austerity, that magic word austerity, maintains the current power structure. It will gradually decrease the number of players and gradually increase concentration of wealth at the top. That's what austerity is about. That's what it's about in Europe. That's what it's about here. That's what it's about in the debate going on in Congress now. And here's the effect. 6 financial enterprises now dominate the funding or orchestrate the strangling of the American revival. These banks control the boards of the 12 Federal Reserve banks. When they decide to lend or not to lend to Exxon or BP or General Electric, or to move for the takeover of private prisons, or to defund public education and push for private charter schools, they have the power to dramatically influence the direction of American policy and culture. The core insight is this: at the heart of the global empire is not manufacturing, or technology, or energy, oil and gas, or even the defense contractors. The managers who are really calling the shots, because they control the money supply, are the banks. Behind each industry is global banking. Global banking is therefore the enabler of the plutocracy.
Is that supposed to be changing?
The global banking empire is not by definition immoral, but it is amoral. Morality is not a guiding principle. Health or education are not its guiding principles. The common good is not its guiding principle. Global banking caters to and serves a certain kind of profit against all other profit. It serves profit only in dollars, measured only in capital, while the rest of us, working people and professionals, school teachers and farmers, serve each other as well as ourselves. And that puts on the table a whole new equation when we serve each other as well as ourselves. That is an equation that Wall Street does not recognize. That is an equation that includes morality, justice, fairness, and compassion. The strategy of We Are People here is that we will move forward now to encourage banking to play on the human field with humans, and to modify, scale down, bring under control their fixation on greed and power. We don't ask them to become saints. We only ask them to play by the new rules that history has given to all the people, in a century to become a century beyond plutocracy, a century of the whole people. The historical context, and my final thought on this, the reason to talk about these centuries, this coming century, is this. As feudalism declined over the course of the last 7 centuries, an open market and democratic governments became dominant forces in Western history. These new forces were, however, never unopposed. The residual tendency to plutocracy never went away. A reactionary counterforce never ceased preparing, planning, and propagandizing a return to power. By the 21st century, it would be plutocracy built upon market-created capital rather than land. And this time, not tied to territory or even to specific means of production. Supreme wealth's greatest assets would be liquid and global. And this time, unlike land or manufacturing, because financial wealth is movable, electronic, and secret, its dominion could be hidden. And this time, being hidden, its power could quietly invade and come to control national economies and sovereign governments. This time, therefore, and for the first time, a governing empire was at once globally powerful and, for practical purposes, almost invisible. And this time, like rulers of Rome, the new emperors declared themselves to be too big to fail. And this time, because for the first time, the people were watching, they were wrong. Here's our strategy. We're going to talk tonight about 3 stages: engaging, educating, Nico's going to talk to us about that with his slideshow that's half off the board, that's going to get back on the board in a minute. And we'll talk more about that. But we're thinking about a program that could engage all of us. It could engage far more than those of us who are able to come to a meeting on a night like this. But would engage the people who have suffered so much, who are now invisible. Those who have suffered the most from this recession, this decline, are largely invisible. They are millions. They are millions. But do we know their names? Do they come together? Can we find them in one marketplace? Can we find them in the public square? Can we find them in the marches? Can we find them in the protest meetings? Can we find them? No, we can't, because one by one they are scattered all across the state of Mexico and all across the country, and they are not brought together. The foreclosed are not brought together. Students who cannot get loans, who are suffering from $90,000 of burden that they're going to pay for 25 years, are not brought together. They don't know each other and they can't find each other. What would it be if we could help them find each other and we could bring them together with people who feel big foreclosed? There are business people, substantial business people here in Santa Fe, whom I know personally, who having done remarkably good work over the years, cannot get loans because loans are not being given because bailout money is going to the $90 billion in bonuses to people on Wall Street. They cannot get loans because the banks are not lending, and the banks don't have to lend because any of us has been bargaining with a bank. Any of us have been in a property deal and gone to the bank and said, I'd like to change the wording of your document. Any of us knows you don't get a bargain with a bank. Banks don't bargain. Banks are not part of our culture. Banks are out there in power and away from us. The only possible way we can have an impact is not to go to New York, or not to go to Paris, not to go to London or Shanghai, but to begin on the corner of Paseo and St. Michael's. To begin with our own accounts. To begin the non-cooperation that we were taught by Martin Luther King and Gandhi. Moving our own accounts. Taking our own accounts to places where we can have an effect, and having an effect with banking that we cannot have on Goldman Sachs at the beginning. If this movement can spread from the north of New Mexico to the middle of New Mexico to the south of New Mexico, and this movement can spread from New Mexico to Colorado, and if this movement can spread from Colorado to Utah or to Nebraska, pretty soon the movement would have some purchase, have some momentum. So that's the long-range strategy. To begin to organize short, small, intensely with things that we can do. We don't have to wait for legislative action in order to change our accounts. We don't have to wait for legislative action to fight each other. We don't have to wait for legislative action to make ourselves our presence known. That's the strategy. We'll be working on it through the coming years, together with the other programs, the Alliance, and the Democracy Polling, Democratic Polling, about which I spoke. All of that will be going forward. We greatly need the inspiration, the intelligence, the wisdom of all of you. We need the financial support of all of you. We have a fundraising team that's going very well. We need, in addition, your help. So all of that is on the way. We're going to be talking about moving our money. We're going to be talking about coming together. We're going to be setting dates, as in, for example, July 4th, we all come together in the Capitol and work together. This is not a one-year program. This is not this January program. This is a 2-year program. This is at least 2 years. To educate, engage us all, and then legislate. And when we get to legislating, we're going to be talking about public banking, locally owned banks. So, we have 3 helpers to pass baskets. In case you're able to help us with some kind of money to pay for the haul and that would be helpful. That keeps us from pulling out of our pockets. Thanks very much for that. And be conscious of the fact, as you think about putting $1 in the basket, putting $5 in the basket, think about the fact that there are 30 people, or 40 people, or 50 people who have spent hundreds of hours working on these campaigns, putting together these programs, doing the research, and going after this grid structure of the plutocracy. Hundreds and hundreds of hours have been donated. And if you can contribute to help out with that, so that they will not be out there on their own, that would be very helpful. Now I want to shift, and while you're doing that, appreciate your help with that. Person, there's a basket over here, somebody's asking. I got an email in August from Texas from a young man who said, I'd like to help with the banking. I'd like to get working. I'd like to move out of the job I've got and move in with you and help do research on banking. I'd like to be a part of this. And what I'm doing is too mainstream. I'd like to come and help. And all you have to do is put them up in your house and feed me dinner, and that'll be it, and I'll go to work. And so Whit Krueger came. He's been here now for almost 2 months. He's been researching like crazy. We get up in the morning, we have a cup of tea, and he talks about the way in which the global conspiracy is taking over the world. And I say, whoa, whoa, whoa. He's gracious with me, be gentle. But he's prepared tonight to talk some more about the expansion, the expansion of this global banking empire. So, welcome with me, Whit Krueger, our intern, a fantastic young worker who's going to give you a little bit of a presentation, about 10 minutes on what he's learned about global banking. Come on up, Whit.
Hello, everybody. So, I'd like to start by asking, what is a global bank and why should the power of global banks concern us? The difference between a local and a global bank is that while the interests of a local bank are in the development of the local economy, global banks take local economies for granted. They are predatory in their conquest for private profit at the expense of the public good. Global banks are not loyal to any nation nor community, yet they wield great political influence in every nation and every community, as we've been discussing. Banks are powerful institutions because they impact each and every industry through control over banking. Control over banking means a control over lending, which in turn means being able to pick and choose which industries develop and how they develop. If private profit is the singular goal of a bank, it will pick and choose to invest only in those industries which yield the greatest profits, without regard for environmental degradation, human rights, or the long-term sustainability of communities. The term globalization refers to our current historic period beginning in the late 1970s until now. So globalization is the story of development pioneered by global financiers throughout what we call the developing world. But that development has been extremely asymmetrical. During this time, the financial sector in America has increased its share of our economy's GDP from under 16% in the 1970s to over 40% today. When the global financial elites speak of opening free trade markets to invest in poor countries, what they really mean is taking control over land, water, oil, and other resources. And in many of these poorest nations around the world, global corporations and the banks that finance them are seeing massive financial gains from these natural resources while the vast majority of the citizens live in abject poverty. The major mechanism of control over these markets is debt. Third world countries are pressured to take on loans from global banking institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, and when the interest cannot be paid on those loans, global bankers agree to postpone the payment on the interest in exchange for what they really want, which is authority over public policy. They demand structural adjustment policies, like outlawing unions, eliminating environmental regulations and Social Security, privatizing public services, and cutting farm subsidies as to drive migrants off the farms towards massive pools of cheap labor in cities where they will work in sweatshops. These measures are deemed necessary for development, for profitability, and it is a similar story to what's happening across Europe now with austerity cuts and privatization of public services like the mail, and you can bet that they want to do it here next. The thesis that I am proposing is that we should try and see New Mexico through the eyes of a Wall Street shark, because from that perspective, New Mexico's relationship with global banks is akin to that of a third world country. The New Mexican recently reported that New Mexico has the greatest wealth gap in the country. New Mexico also has 55% high school dropout rate, and of course, exceedingly high teen pregnancy and other social ills that result from this wealth gap. These statistics are connected, and so next question I'd like to ask is, what lessons can we learn from the wealth gap? Our current economic trajectory indicates that trickle-down theory does not work, has never worked, and is merely a form of propaganda. The result of trickle-down theory is an increasing wealth gap that shows beyond a doubt how the problems of global banking are self-perpetuating, not self-regulating. When the markets crashed in 2008, the Federal Reserve Chairman, Alan Greenspan, said that he found a fundamental flaw in his understanding of human nature. His alleged misunderstanding concerns the greed is good dogma of the 1980s, which provided ideological arguments for the deregulation of financial markets. Any subsequent attempts to reintroduce financial regulations were met with harsh criticism that it will inhibit growth. But a question we should ask is, what is growth worth anyhow if it is so radically asymmetrical? In this model, is development just a code word for consolidation of wealth among the most affluent? The wealth gap increases our economic vulnerability as a nation by eviscerating the middle class. As the wealth gap has increased, poverty, starvation, homelessness have increased, the quality of public education has decreased, as well as access to resources like healthcare. Global banks will always choose private profit over the public good because that's their job, it is their mandate. To curb the wealth gap, we must then curb the influence of global banks. And to curb the influence of global banks, we must introduce local public banking alternatives, as we will be discussing later on. Because despite what the Wall Street CEOs might say, no amount of cuts to welfare programs will alter our current course. In fact, it will only exacerbate wealth disparity by targeting the poor and disenfranchised. The wealth gap also shows that today the emperor clearly has no clothes. In the press, leaders in global finance have been called masters of the universe, wizards of Wall Street, high priests and oracles, terms which connote a shadowy elite that pulls the wool over the eyes of the public in service to Pharaoh. Today there's no Pharaoh, instead the global banks themselves act as sovereign. Unlike our elected politicians, throughout this period of globalization, financial technocrats have been regarded as politically neutral, civic-minded geniuses on a mission to eradicate global poverty. It is clearer today than ever before that none of those things are true. Just a couple statistics. According to Gallup, today 33% of the world says they do not have enough money for food. It is estimated the entire continent of Africa, despite its vast natural resources, owns only 1% of the world's wealth. The most egregious example of the myth of political neutrality of the financial elites is the Federal Reserve Corporation. The Federal Reserve is a private bank owned and operated by Wall Street banking dynasties such as the Warburgs, Coons, Loebs, Lehmans, Rockefellers, Morgans, and Rothschilds. This private bank and these families own our public money supply and lend it to us at cost so that for every US dollar that is printed to spend on social welfare, interest is paid to the tycoons of global banking. Warfare is the most expensive industry for the taxpayer, but the most profitable for private military corporations and the banks that finance them. In this system, there is a conflict of interest because the greater the expense to the taxpayer, the greater the return on the interest that is paid to the Federal Reserve. From the colonial patriots to Presidents Jackson, Lincoln, Garfield, Kennedy, Americans have fought against privatized control of our nation's money supply, yet the propaganda campaign in support of Federal Reserve systems has been so successful that most leaders in politics and business today will tell you that the Fed's lack of oversight and democratic process is a virtue because it keeps them politically neutral. But when the Fed, which represents the same global banking interests that run Wall Street, tells the public that we must borrow trillions from them to cover the losses of our money that they have squandered on Wall Street, that neutrality looks a lot like fraud. As a result of the crash and ongoing bailouts, we now owe trillions to the same global banking interests which lost our money and crashed our markets in the first place. To add insult to injury, these Wall Street executives who have received subsidies in the form of bailouts and tax breaks are now demanding cuts to welfare programs to justify more corporate tax breaks. Like a broken record, they will say more tax breaks are needed for the job creators to stimulate growth because they still expect us to believe in the myth of trickle-down theory. The Campaign to Fix the Debt is a Wall Street lobbying group made up of CEOs led by Goldman Sachs and Lloyd Blankfein, and they are lobbying for austerity in America. The same bankers who caused the crash and took our bailout money are now lecturing the public on financial responsibility, and they act like they are above the law. This is in stark contrast to the Icelandic people who held trials and threw all politicians and bankers found guilty of fraud into jail. Iceland now uses 100% renewable energy, and it is the only country to do either of those two things. The global banks have been caught laundering money from drug cartels. They are invested in the military-industrial complex so that they make money from the taxpayer-funded They make money from the taxpayer-funded private prisons, which is our fastest-growing industry right now. They make money from the growing police state, as well as the drug money from the cartels. So in this criminal industry, the banks make out in 3 ways. So why would they want to stop that? Why would they want to invest in public education when they can make more money by privatizing it? Why would they invest here at home when they can make more money by financing global corporations that outsource to sweatshops? Why would we hope for the development of renewable energy when we know that the banks are doing just fine financing big oil? The Iceland example represents the choice between either continuing to passively allow global banks to develop our economy the way they want to, or we can take control over our own destinies by creating our own development bank that answers not to Wall Street but to a public mandate that will invest in sectors like public education, renewable energy, agricultural sustainability. So long as we leave our development and lending strategies to the global banks, we will never see these changes to our economy. A successful public bank could serve as a model for the dozens of cities and states around the country that at this very moment are having the same conversation, reaching the same conclusions, and agree on the need to unite to take back control over our own economic development and our own future. Thank you. Now I'm going to pass it off to Phil, who will elaborate on some local banking options.